Hi, welcome. In today's session, I want to focus on a word that we see increasingly used around business and business schools, sustainability. A word that I call the third leg of the Theocratic Trifecta, but more on that later. But if you're familiar with my work, or even if you've read a few pieces that I've written, you know I'm not a great fan of ESG. I came to that standing honestly because I started in 2019 with curiosity about how an acronym that nobody had heard of had taken over the investment and the business world. In a year later, I revisited the idea more with a cynical perspective because I saw how big the gravy train had become and how many people were making money on ESG. And still later, that cynicism has become almost contempt as I've seen ESG defenders rewrite history and retroactively change their own definitions. Along the way, I also talked about impact investing, which I think of as a subset of ESG investing, and talked about how little impact we've seen from the trillions of dollars supposedly going into impact investing. But preceding all of these, I looked at this notion of stakeholder wealth maximization, where you had people arguing that the end game for business is to not keep shareholders happy, but to keep all stakeholders happy. And who can argue against it, right? That seems like a pretty reasonable idea. I'm going to try to tie all of these together and use sustainability as my tying thread as I go through this session. So as I look at sustainability, I have to start as a skeptic. Why? Because many of the same people who've been promoting ESG and impact investing are also promoting sustainability. The reason I'm going to pick on sustainability is whenever I've critiqued ESG or impact investing or stakeholder wealth maximization, the response I've often got is the problem isn't those concepts, but the real idea here is sustainability. So I was curious about what sets sustainability apart, what makes it different from all these other ideas. And in critiquing sustainability, I might be swimming against the tide, but I have to admit that less so than I was 5 years ago, because clearly the spell seems to have broken, at least in terms of the sales pitch. Why? Because reality has reared its ugly head, and also because of the mendacity of some of the actors involved in this process. Let's start with sustainability then. When I first looked at the word, the question I asked was sustaining what? I'll give you the choices. We can talk about planet sustainability, things that make the planet a better place to live and affect our well-being, our collective welfare. This can cover everything from climate change to healthcare to income inequality. You can talk about product sustainability, building a product that lasts for a longer time. In a throwaway world where product obsolescence seems to be built into the product, I think we're all yearning for products that last a little longer, product sustainability. Or it can be corporate or business sustainability, things you can do to extend the life of your business. Now, when I push sustainability advocates, they seem to think that all three usually go together. That if you build a more sustainable business, it has to make more sustainable products, and these two sustainabilities will make the planet a more sustainable place. But that's not the way I see it. Life is full of trade-offs. What if in the process of building a more sustainable product, you undercut the sustainability of a business? I'll give you an example. Let's assume you're a razor company, razors to shave, and that you make most of your money by selling blades, which is the way Gillette makes most of its money in that space. Let's suppose you come up with a blade that lasts forever. That's good, right? Sustainable product. But if you build that product, maybe your business can't last anymore. In the process of product sustainability, you have to sacrifice business sustainability. Let me give you another trade-off. What if you have a business that the best thing you can do for the planet is to cease to exist? There are people who make this argument against fossil fuel companies. There you're putting up business sustainability against planet sustainability. The point I'm trying to raise and I will come back to this, is we have to talk about these trade-offs and not brush them to the side, because they're more often the rule rather than the exception. With that lead-in though, I went looking for definitions of sustainability. I started at business schools. Business schools have become very fond of the word sustainability, with classes with the word in the name. We have executive courses we offer. I found one, NYU offers one, but I went to the Vanderbilt offering of a course on sustainability. For $3,000, you can get a certificate, and the course supposedly covers a holistic approach to conducting business while achieving long-term environmental, social, and economic sustainability. Okay, make of that what you will. I went combing through papers so that you don't have to. There are more than 12,000 articles built around sustainability. I found a 2003 paper that describes sustainability as that corporate growth and profitability are important, but it also requires the corporation to pursue societal goals, specifically those related to sustainable development, environmental protection, social justice and equity, economic development. That's academia. Increasingly, the word sustainability has found its way into corporate missions. The Hartford, U.S. insurance company, described corporate sustainability as centered around developing business strategies and solutions to serve the needs of our stakeholders while embracing the innovation and foresight to ensure we are able to meet those needs in the decades to come. Governments have entered the game as well. The EU has come up with has a whole section on corporate sustainability, and it describes corporate sustainability as integrating social, environmental, ethical, consumer, and human right concerns into business strategy and operations. As you can see, the definitions are everything and nothing. They're all over the place. So to look at where we are with sustainability, let's go back in time. This argument that businesses have a responsibility to society is age-old. It's been around as long as you've had private enterprises. Adam Smith described economics as the gospel of mammon. Milton Friedman at the other end, you can think of these as bookends, argued that the business of business is business and that it should not be its role to go out and solve society's problems. But over the last 5 decades, this argument has raged in business campuses. It's taken on different acronyms. It's called corporate responsibility, CSR, then ESG, sustainability. They're all trying to measure the same thing, which is how much responsibility do businesses have to society and how do they incorporate those responsibilities into their actions. But it is true in the last 2 decades, the concept has taken off. A PwC survey of 1,640 companies in 62 countries in 2022 found that a third of these companies had CSOs. I'll be quite honest, I did not know there was an acronym or what that acronym stood for. It's Corporate Sustainability Officers. More on that in a minute. But the number of CSOs tripled in 2021. Clearly, sustainability is finding its way into boardrooms and businesses. In academia, the mention of the words of sustainability words has picked up. In this graph, you can see the number of articles built around sustainability has gone up from about 1,000 articles between 1994 and 2003 to more than 4,500 in 2018 to 2021. It's broken them down too. Initially, it's more environmental in the early years. The tilt went to social, now seems to go into governance, but clearly a lot more articles about sustainability than there used to be. So I went back to this idea of a CSO, and I got a chance to find out for myself what a CSO does because I had to give a talk to about 50 CSOs from very large companies. I didn't even know there were that many CSOs when I gave the talk. So I started the talk with a question, and I don't think they appreciated this question. I said, what do you guys do? I'm just curious. So we went around the room, and after about the 7th or 8th description, they were clear that their descriptions didn't match up. They had different roles they were playing. So I decided to take what I was hearing and break it down into 4 roles that I can see for CSOs. The first is a CSO as Yoda. For those of you who are Star Wars fans, Yoda is the all-wise Jedi, right? So these are the CSOs who tell companies what the long-term consequences of their decisions will be, not just for the companies, but for society. They have this amazing perspective that lets them see decades down the road and say, if you do this, these are the costs and benefits to society. The training you might need to be a Yoda CSO, maybe you spend 10 years up in a cave with a wise person guiding you, or maybe you get Jedi training. That could take decades as well, but you're wiser than the rest of us. The second role I can see for a CSO is as Jiminy Cricket. For those of you who are Pinocchio fans, Pinocchio was, of course, is a book that, but I think of it as the Disney movie made in 1942. Jiminy Cricket is this little cricket that sits on Pinocchio's shoulder, and his job through the entire movie is to tell him all the things he's doing that could get him into trouble. He's like a conscience on your shoulder. CSOs, as Jiminy Crickets, act as corporate consciences. They essentially tell companies when they're breaking the rules or when they're getting close to the edge and tell them not to do it. And like the movie, they're ignored most of the time. And even when they're right, they get little glory. You can also have CSOs as public relations officers, marketing geniuses. What they do is take actions that a company takes, or products that a company makes that cannot be in the best interests of the planet, but they can package it in a way to make it sound like it's good for the world. I mean, you saw this with Unilever, the consumer product company, telling its 400 brand managers to each come up with a societal reason why their brands were good for the world. How you make mayonnaise good for the world, I don't know, but they tried. And then you have CSOs, embalmers. What do? They feel that their job is to make sure their companies last forever, if you can. They want to make the corporate life longer. Now, that's why I describe them as embalmers, because a company has a life cycle, and those of you familiar with my life cycle work, when your reason for your existence is gone, you should go too. But if you have CSO as an embalmer, they will keep you alive, just like the old time mummies, the people who bandaged up the Egyptian pharaohs, the promise that they could live forever. The promises were not true. But you can fall into one of these four buckets. So as you look at CSOs and you listen to what they do, ask yourself, what is this particular CSO's role? CSO's Yoda, CSO's Jiminy Cricket, CSO's marketing person, or CSO's embalmer. Now, as you look at these very different descriptions of what they do, it's not their fault. It's a reflection of the confusion at the heart of what exactly corporate sustainability is trying to do. Now, when I started the session, I described sustainability as the third leg of the Theocratic Trifecta. Let me put some flesh on what I mean by that. As I see it, this drive in both sustainability and ESG comes from the notion that stakeholders matter. And that's true, right? A business has multiple stakeholders. You have shareholders, you have lenders, you have employees, you have customers, you have society, supply. So all of these different stakeholders. And the driving force behind the stakeholder wealth maximization movement is that we should take care of all of them, that the end game for a business is to, and that seems like common sense. Inherent here is the belief that focusing on shareholders, the traditional view in business, is selfish. You're putting one stakeholder ahead of the rest. I think they're missing a key issue. Every other stakeholder outside of shareholders has a contractual agreement with the business. Lenders lend money to a business, but they have a contractual agreement, interest payments, principal payments, loan covenants that go with it. Employees work for a business, but they're wage contracts. We can debate how strong or weak they are, but they have contracts. Customers buy a product or service from the company, they get utility from it, and they have a contract. And if the company's products and services don't match that contractual description, customers can get their money back. Society has its own set of contractual agreements with businesses in the form of rules and regulations that businesses are supposed to follow and taxes that society collects from them. And finally, you look at vendors and suppliers, they provide services and products to the company, but not for charity. They get a payment in return. The only group that doesn't have a contractual agreement is shareholders. They get whatever's left over. And for that reason, they're given primacy. Because if they weren't, there'd be nothing left over. Now, starting a few decades ago, this push towards stakeholder wealth became front and center. And it's manifested itself first in sustainability and in what I call sustainability's handmaid in ESG. Let me explain. The idea of sustainability is built on the premise that shareholder wealth maximization comes at the expense of other stakeholders, and that your end game should be to create a sustainable business that makes sustainable products, all of which contribute to a sustainable planet. And if you do this, you're going to be more profitable and valuable at the same time. That's a promise. The problem, though, is planet, product, and corporate sustainability don't go hand to hand. And whatever version of sustainability you use, it'll come at a cost to somebody. ESG, similarly, the promise is that you can measure the sustainability with a score. That score is backed up by dimensions and metrics and data that you collect, and once measured and monitored, can improve the behavior of the measured. That's a promise. The problem is measurements inherently are flawed and they create gaming. It's a feature of measurement mechanisms. Put simply, you tell me how you score me and I'm going to find ways to improve my score. At the end though, ESG measures will reflect that gaming effect. Higher scores will come at a cost. Even if they measure what they're supposed to, they will come at a cost to companies to get that higher score. I think there are two fundamental truths that have been missed in this discussion that come back to essentially haunt all of these measures. The first is that goodness, much as these different measures try to run away from goodness, they're all trying to measure some variation of goodness, is inherently subjective, and there will never be consensus. And if there is, it will be a false consensus. Any system that tries to measure it is going to reflect the biases and the judgments of those measuring it. Second, and I think this has to be the truth that has to start the discussion, being good requires sacrifice. That if you ask somebody to be good, it comes with a cost. And the question is, who's bearing that cost? So let's take a closer look at what the measurement process has done in this game and how it's played out using ESG, which I described as sustainability's handmaiden. The reason I describe ESG as sustainability's handmaiden is if ESG did not exist, sustainability would have had to invent it. Here's what ESG did for sustainability. It basically allowed sustainability to get measured. How does that help? Once it gets measured, you can start to invest on its basis. You can tell companies what they can do to improve that score. ESG allowed sustainability to become mainstream. So I think it's, at this stage for sustainability to kind of say, look, it's not our problem, ESG became toxic. That doesn't strike me as something you can walk away from. Because once you open that door to measurement, here are the things that came with it. First came the measurement services, each claiming to be objective, but they're all making judgments on what goes into a score. I've talked about, and others have talked about, how ESG scores are not correlated across different services. Same companies rank differently. Second, this is part of any scoring system. Businesses start to figure out how the scores are measured and they start to game the system. Much as we like to complain about greenwashing, it's a feature of ESG. It comes out of that measurement system. Advocates wring their hands about greenwashing. They think the answer is to come up with better definitions, more rules, more disclosure, not recognizing that this is exactly how the gaming gets worse. And finally, governments step in, trying to help. We talked about the EU trying to define measures of sustainability. One standard fits all. Looking to the EU for ways in which you can save the world or make business more vibrant is like asking a vegan where the best place to eat steak is. How would they know? The process we've seen play out with the ESG is exactly the process you'd expect with any kind of measurement system built around this process, what they're trying to measure with sustainability. So much as sustainability is trying to run away from ESG, they share a lot of commonalities. And here they are. First, they're both opaque. They're both fuzzy. They don't leave a lot of details unspecified. And that was by design. It allowed people to sell ESG as whatever they wanted to. It allowed people to buy ESG without asking tough questions. They're both rooted in virtue. Much as they, again, try to run away from it, they will both start with the premise we can make the world a better place. I'm not taking issue with the motivation. I think it's a good motivation, but we've got to be honest about that was the motive. So almost every debate about ESG and sustainability ends up as a debate about, are you a good person? Third, both these measures have become, there's a cycle they go through. They start off as saying, we want to make the world a better place. Somewhere along the way, the marketing people take over and they sell it to all people as you can be good and you can be more valuable. You can be good and earn higher returns. When that sales pitch falls apart, they fall back on disclosure and say, what's the big deal? It's just about letting people know, make informed judgments. I've talked about what I call disclosure diarrhea, but there are two downsides to this disclosure process. First is Disclosures can become a substitute for acting. In fact, they can become an impediment to acting. You think because you've disclosed things, you don't need to do things anymore. Now, that's why I've described as analogous to confession for a lapsed Catholic, where you confess to your sins, not because you want to stop sinning, but because you want to go back to sinning even more. The second is, as you disclose more and more, there's a tipping point at which it becomes completely unproductive. The people that these disclosures are meant for stop paying attention because they're getting overwhelmed. And finally, both these, both sustainability and ESG were sold as you can have your cake and eat it too. You can be good and more valuable. You can be good and earn higher returns. It either underplayed or ignored the sacrifice and cost associated with each. And I think that is the original sin that's come back to bite both. So can sustainability be saved? Yes, but I think it'll take a lot of work. And here are the things I think we need to do. We all share this common objective of making the world a better place. And whether we call it sustainability or something else, we have to think of a way to do it better. First, we have to be clear-eyed about what businesses can do and what businesses should not be doing. You're saying, what about the things that businesses cannot do? Who's going to do them? That's why we have rules and regulations and governments. I think for the last 2 decades, governments have abdicated that responsibility and passed on companies that's neither fair nor productive. So we have to be clear-eyed over what businesses can be asked to do. Second, we have to be open about the cost of asking businesses to do these things that we call sustainable things, where we're asking them to go beyond what's legally required to do what's right for society. We have to be clear, there will always be a cost. Third, we have to be clear about who bears those costs. Just a few weeks ago, I was in front of a Canadian parliamentary committee that was thinking about writing rules to make banks behave in a more sustainable way. What they were talking about was Canadian banks make a lot of money lending to fossil fuel companies, which is no surprise. Canada is a natural resource rich country, and there are a lot of companies built around those natural resources. What this committee was talking about was making banks lend less to fossil fuel companies and lend more to green energy companies. You're saying, what's wrong with that? Well, the fact that they're not doing it right now must mean that it doesn't make economic sense. So the way you do it is you force banks to lend it to green energy companies and charge them below market rates. That's what lending more means. And to fossil fuel companies by charging them above market rates. So the committee said, we're going to pass the cost on to banks. And my response was, what constituent in a bank, what stakeholder in a bank is going to bear these costs? It can't be the shareholders. There aren't enough of them to cover these costs. It could be depositors. Do you really want bank depositors to bear the costs of banks being virtuous in the green energy space? We have to be clear about who bears the costs of being good, not ignore them. And be honest about whether the people bearing these costs are the people in the best position to be bearing those costs. I mean, one of the problems we've had over the last few decades is we've talked about the costs of globalization or the costs of sustainability, not recognizing that the people bearing those costs are the people who are least able to bear those costs or in the worst positions to bear those costs. But the reason we haven't had that discussion, we act like there are no costs. And finally, we need to drain the gravy train. We need to get rid of the consultants, the experts, the disclosure specialists, the measurers. They've taken over the space, like the money lenders in the temples. They brought the space down. I think we need to drain the gravy train because without it, we're going to revisit exactly the same mistakes we've made in the past. And in doing all of this, there's an elephant in the room, a problem that none of us seem to want to talk about, which is while we as consumers, investors, and voters talk a good game, we talk about the social good, we talk about climate change, we're unwilling to burden ourselves even slightly to deliver that good. Now, is this because we've become more callous? Maybe it is, but I think the bigger reason is we've lost trust. Trust in experts, trust in institutions, trust in governments, and who can blame us? So whether it's the city of San Diego wanting to charge 0.5% more on sales tax to cover transportation needs, or a central government imposing a carbon tax to cover the need for climate change, I don't think we're giving governments the benefit of the doubt, and who can blame us? Now, I've heard talk talk that this blowback against ESG and sustainability is only in the US and it's mostly political. Now there's some truth to that. It's more in the US than the rest of the world, and perhaps more political in the US than in the rest of the world. But the truth is this blowback is a global blowback. If you live elsewhere in the world, I would suggest that you leave your ivory towers and your echo chambers and talk to people on the street, because they're not buying into this pitch as much as you think they are. It might be pure coincidence that the incumbent governments in Canada and Germany, among the leaders in the climate change fight, are facing the political abyss in elections next year. But it may also reflect the fact that their voters don't buy into change as much as they think the governments think they should. So as we look forward, you're saying, how do we get that trust back? I'll tell you how we don't. We don't get that trust back by lecturing people on their moral shortcomings or how unethical it is to go out and create a carbon footprint. You don't get it back by gaslighting them. That's a word I love. My son taught it to me. But essentially telling them they're better off when they're clearly materially worse off. It has to come from qualities that don't come easily to experts. It'll require humility, where the agents of change, whoever they are transparent about what they hope to accomplish and uncertain about how to get there. So they tell the world how uncertain they are. And also have patience. Patience to try small things before big things. Incremental change over revolutionary change. Those are not things that will come easily to the experts and the regulators and the rule makers, but it's the only way forward. Look, we all share a common end game. We want a better world to live in. I don't think our definitions of what comprise a better world might converge, but we share that common objective. We have to accept that what we're doing right now is not working. If the definition of insanity is trying the same thing over and over again, expecting a different outcome, how do you explain COP29? It's the 29th try at something that's clearly not working. We need to reorient ourselves, do things differently. And I hope we do. I thank you very much for listening, and I hope you have a good day.